Hello, everyone. I am Moxie with Squibbler, and I am excited to talk to you today about world building in fiction. So, this webinar is really helpful for people who are writing science fiction and writing fantasy. We're going to help you understand how to create universes that your readers are going to love. So, in this webinar, you're going to learn some tips from the professionals who are in the field and writing science fiction and fantasy and how they work on their world building. We'll look at some good examples of world building, and we'll look at some tips from Squibbler to help you create your world as well. So while all novels demand some world building, almost every book has a setting. The science fiction and fantasy genres are definitely the most intense when it comes to setting as a character. It becomes a character of its own. The reader doesn't need to know all the minutiae of the world or worlds that you're creating, but as an author, you need to know your world and its rules very well. This intense planning is going to give your world credibility, and it'll help your narrative stay consistent as well. By their very nature, science fiction and fantasy are in many ways much more liberal than other genres. Readers of these genres have learned to expect the unexpected. They want to read about creatures, places, and things that don't exist. They want to enter worlds where our rules of physics do not necessarily apply. So authors of these genres are often free to explore elements that might otherwise make us uncomfortable, like so much of what happens in the Game of Thrones novels by George R.R. Martin. We're one step removed from these fantasy worlds and these science fiction worlds, so we don't feel as uncomfortable reading about strange things that may happen in them. So here are some tips from the professionals that you can use when you're building your own world. Martin, who wrote Game of Thrones, says that he likes building immersive worlds in his novels so his readers can metaphorically get lost in them. He says that in a lot of contemporary fiction, the setting is not as important, that we know it's Chicago, we know it's New York, but it's extremely important in fantasy. So you compare this idea of contemporary fiction that doesn't really develop the setting to something like Tolkien's Lord of the Rings trilogy or Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea. The setting in those books are very, very important. And these authors include lots of detail to make these places seem real. And a lot of them even include maps of their worlds. N.K. Jemisin, who wrote the Broken Earth trilogy, is a Hugo Award-winning fantasy and sci-fi author, and she advises to be careful that you're not using other cultures as props for alien life in your worlds. I was thinking about examples where we do see this, and probably a really popular one is how Korean, Japanese dress and makeup were used in the Star Wars prequel, The Phantom Menace. So using indigenous cultures and other minorities from Earth as representations in your imaginary world or fantasy world can also be cliche, Jemison warns. So that's just something to be wary of. Leigh Bardugo, who wrote Shadow and Bone, says she usually begins her books not with place, but with a question. What if darkness was a place and you had to fight monsters in it? Was the big question that led her to create the world in Shadow and Bone. She also suggests looking at books written by masters in the field. She said she read Frank Hebert, Ursula K. Le Guin, and George R.R. Martin. Nnedi Okorafor is a science fiction and fantasy author who wrote Akata Witch. She's also written some Black Panther episodes for Marvel. And she had to carve out her own genre description, African futurism and African Jujuism. She strongly advises carving out your own space to avoid formulaic writing. There are a lot of people, for example, who try to emulate Tolkien. A lot of fantasy writers want to be the next Tolkien. But readers and publishers are looking for something new. They don't want to rehash what's already been done. James Gurney, who wrote Dinotopia, emphasizes that developing a coherent theme that permeates the world's design is going to help ensure that everything from the architecture to the creatures feels unified. And if you take a look at the artwork and the writing in his series, the Dinotopia series, you'll see that he does accomplish this. But successful fantasy and sci-fi are more than just setting. It's also what your story is about. And how does the world fit in with that theme that you're developing? So you think about something like Frank Hebert's Dune, where the conflict is over resources and colonization. There's a theme there, and it's tied into the desert planet. Some more tips from the pros. You want to establish your rules and limitations early on. This includes things like the laws of physics, magic systems, technology levels, and even social and political structures. Concept artist and illustrator Ian McCraig from Star Wars, Harry Potter, stresses the importance of having consistent internal logic in your world, especially for fantasy settings. If magic is going to be present, you need to set the boundaries for its use. Another tip is to focus on the cultures and societies. Cultures, language, and social structures are going to breathe life into your worlds. Create diverse civilizations with distinct languages, belief systems, and traditions. Tolkien created his own languages for his novels. In the Game of Thrones concert work, artist Mark Simonetti paid attention to how different climates, geography, and resources are going to shape the architecture and societal structures of various houses. And we see those in the television series and in the books as well. Geography should also shape the development of your world. If there are mountain ranges, oceans, forests, deserts, these things are going to impact how civilizations survive and thrive there. Are there trade routes and political boundaries? John Ho, who worked on the Lord of the Rings movies, noted that landscapes should reflect the cultures they contain. He said he considers how land affects the livelihoods and belief systems of the people living in it. This made me think about the hobbits in Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, and how much the hobbits love the Shire and they long to return to it. So we can see that they're connected to the land that they're living in. Another tip from the pros is to consider the creatures and flora. You want to think about how the creatures, plants, and ecosystems interact with your world. Every creature and plant should have a purpose and a reason for evolving the way it did, and it should integrate with the world's environment. If you want to see an example of where this works, you might go back and watch the Avatar films, where the environment is especially important to the culture living there. Terrell Whitlatch, who is a creature designer for Star Wars, explains that the anatomy and behavior of the creature should feel believable and serve the narrative. She also advises thinking about the creature's habitat and diet when designing them. Some more tips from the pros: you might want to think about using symbolism and mythology. Incorporate mythological or symbolic elements to enrich your world's history and depth. It could be something you made up, or it could be something that you're drawing from another time. Many artists and designers draw from real world mythology, but adapt it to suit their fictional worlds. So, Ralph McQuarrie, who was another concept artist for Star Wars, infused designs with symbolic elements that referred to classical and mythological themes. This gives the world a timeless, epic feel, even though it's set in the future. And we see someone like fantasy author Rick Riordan using the Greek pantheon successfully in his popular Percy Jackson series. Some more tips from the pros: experiment and revise. Don't be afraid to refine your world over time. Many professional artists and writers stress the importance of revising and experimenting with different elements until they feel right. Mike Magnolia, the creator of Hellboy, advises writers to keep reworking ideas until they strike the right balance between narrative and design. Your creatures should also have a direct relationship with the world around them. You want to think about how the environment and societal structure are going to affect their personalities, their goals, their daily lives, maybe even the conflict you're setting up. World builder and author Brandon Sanderson, who wrote Fable Haven, suggests designing the world so it challenges the characters and influences their journey, making the setting integral to the story. And we see this in a lot of popular science fiction and fantasy. You do want to create a sense of history. A lived in world should feel like it has a past. You want to think about things like ancient ruins, historical conflicts, or relics of bygone eras that your characters encounter. H.R. Geiger, known for his work in Alien, often integrated ancient looking structures and alien artifacts that suggested a deep, mysterious history to the universe. And in turn, this became part of the lore of the Aliens narrative and the comic books, and then on to film translation as well. We see things from the past affecting what's happening in the future. You do want to incorporate real world research. You can draw inspiration from the real world, historical events, geology, biology, human psychology. All of these realms offer fantastic ideas for building a believable world. Artists like Sid Mead, who worked on Blade Runner, often pull from advanced technology concepts and architectural design trends when they're crafting futuristic cities. And this ties in neatly with Philip Dick's theme in the novel that inspired Blade Runner. So here are some tips from Squibbler on world building as well. You might want to start small and then expand. You begin world building with a narrow focus and then build out from there. And you don't necessarily have to have the entire world mapped out immediately. Start with a single city, a character, or event. And then an example of where you can see this is in The Name of the Wind. Patrick Rothfuss focuses on the story of Kofi, his childhood, and his journey through a single setting before expanding into the broader world in subsequent books. Another tip from Squibbler: establish internal logic. Even in fantastical settings, your world has to follow consistent rules. That doesn't mean they have to follow the same rules of physics that we have on Earth, just that if you use a different law, you need to use it consistently in your world. Magic systems, political structures, and technology need clear boundaries, and they need logic to avoid contradictions. Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series is known for its detailed magic system called allomancy, and Sanderson created strict rules for how metals influence magical abilities, making the system feel grounded and logical. And of course, we see this in other works that include magic, such as the Harry Potter series. Another tip from Squibbler: the world should influence the story in meaningful ways. Think about how the geography and politics are going to impact character motivations and plot developments. I would say that Frank Herbert's Dune is a masterclass in this strategy. The desert planet Arrakis is central to the story, and it's affecting everything from the economy due to the spice to the culture and the survival of the inhabitants and the creatures on it. Another tip is real world inspiration. You want to ground your world in reality by drawing inspiration from history, cultures, geography, or technology. This is going to add depth and believability, and it gives you a framework to work with. George Martin based a lot of the political intrigue in A Song of Fire and Ice on historical events like the War of the Roses, which gives his fantasy world a really gritty, realistic feel. And Leigh Bardugo also uses 19th century Russia for inspiration in Shadow and Bone. So both of these authors are building on something that was already in place. Another tip is to create diverse cultures. We've seen the problems of having cliches, but you do want to avoid monolithic cultures in your world. Different societies should have varied customs, languages, and belief systems shaped by their environment and history. And we see this certainly in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, with the different races that are out there. In N.K. Jemison's Broken Earth series, different communities have unique ways of living that reflect the seismic activity of their world. The stillness is a diverse, with each culture reacting differently to the apocalyptic environment. So that's a good example to look for if you want to see diversity and culture building. A rich backstory can also make your world feel lived in, even if not all the details are going to be revealed in the narrative. You want to develop myths, wars, forgotten civilizations that are going to shape the present. Civilizations don't just grow up out of nothing. So Tolkien's Lord of the Rings features detailed histories, languages, mythologies, and the depth of Middle-earth's history from the fall of Numenor to the creation of the One Ring gives it an epic, timeless feel, which is why it's still popular today. You do want to avoid info dumping. You want to introduce your world gradually through character interactions and narrative events. It's really dangerous to get stuck in the pattern of that telling and not showing. So avoid overwhelming the reader with excessive background details all at once. Ursula K. Le Guin does this very well in her sci-fi novel, The Left Hand of Darkness, because she subtly introduces the cold and gender-fluid world of Gathan through the protagonist's experiences, rather than just providing an immediate exposition dump. So if you haven't read that book, I really recommend it. Another tip is to use the environment as a character. You want to treat your world like an active participant in the story. Harsh environments, magical landscapes, or futuristic cities should challenge your characters and push the plot forward. In The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, the apocalyptic setting of the stillness with its deadly seismic activity is as much a character as the people who live there, shaping the plot and societal structure. Another tip is to make the magic or technology reflect your society as well. If you think your world has magic or advanced technology, think about how it's going to influence daily life, class structures, and political power. Think about the ethical and moral implications as well. What does it mean to have a desert planet being colonized because of its resources? This is something that's been a big question for humans as well on our planet. In The Expanse by James S.A. Corey, space travel and advanced technology shape every aspect of life, from politics to the balance of power between Earth and Mars and the Belters. So this resource-driven feels realistic and grounded in the sci-fi universe. Change affects societies in a lot of ways. So whether it's a war, technological revolution, or a discovery of new magic, you want to show how these events ripple through the world and impact different characters. An example is from the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. The discovery of two new forms of magic and the rebirth of the dragon reborn leads to massive shifts in power and culture and warfare across the world. So small ripples and big effects. So one way that you can work on word building within the Squibbler application, you could design your world by creating it as an element under elements and then choosing setting. Once you've added a description, you can continue to add to this by adding attributes for your planet. Does it have mountains? Does it have valleys? Is it a desert landscape? What is the planet like? We've also created a free 5-page worksheet for you to help you design your world. And this is going to be in our resources channel in our Discord server. And I'll show you briefly what this looks like so you'll have an idea. So again, it is pretty detailed. You can start to build up your geography. You'll be able to put the wildlife and vegetation that you want to include in your world. And then you'll start talking about the population that inhabits your planet or your world. Then you'll have an opportunity to set up your culture and society. And finally, you'll talk about science, technology, and magic in your world. So these will all be uploaded for you in the resources channel on Discord with the webinar as well. So thank you for tuning in. I hope you've learned something useful to build your world. We've looked at some tips from the pros. We've looked at some examples of world building, and we've looked at some tips from Squibbler to help you create your world as well. Thank you, as always, for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Bye.